Good morning, and welcome to Missoula Real Estate Today. This is Denny Bedard. Missoula Real Estate Today is presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck & Beck team at Windermere Real Estate. Beck & Beck provide complete service for your real estate transaction and bring you guests who provide interesting information about products and services available in our community. And now, Missoula Real Estate Today on News Talk KGVO. Well, we hope you've been enjoying your Independence Day weekend, and thank you for joining us again on Missoula Real Estate Today. What rights do you have as tenants or prospective tenants? We will find out. Montana Fair Housing promoting justice in housing. And with me today, our return guest, although we figured out it's been like 18 months or more, something like that, Pam Bean, Executive Director with Montana Fair Housing. Hey, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me in.
Yes, I'm sure glad you could make it again. It's wonderful. Well, we better do the get acquainted. We better do the get reacquainted, Pam. Okay. What your position entails and what led you to Montana Fair Housing.
As you mentioned, I'm Executive Director of Montana Fair Housing, right. And I oversee all of our varying programs and make sure they're implemented. You know, of course, hire, fire, all that fun stuff, fundraise. So the executive director just kind of does everything.
Of course. Yeah, yeah, you get those lofty titles.
Yes, without the lofty paycheck.
You get the lofty title and you start looking about how many more things have to go on your business card because of it. That's about
right.
It. Well, how about an overview here, a more serious note? What is Montana Fair Housing's mission?
Our mission is to promote and ensure non-discrimination in housing through outreach, education, dispute resolution, and, when necessary, enforcement activities.
How big of a problem do you feel discrimination is in Western Montana, and how has it improved in recent years, assuming it has improved? I hope it has improved. That's why we have an executive director, right?
Yeah. So I would say it is a big problem.
Okay.
And honestly, over the last few years, I think it's a growing problem. I think in part because Montana's becoming more diverse. I mean, we're not super diverse yet, still demographically largely white, but I think new issues have arisen that many realtors, property managers, landlords, insurance companies, appraisers, whatever, lenders weren't necessarily prepared for in regards to, one, being immigrants, where we've got more and more immigrants coming to the state, and housing providers. And when I use the term housing provider, that's all-encompassing to me for any type of housing transaction that you're eligible for that ensures you can purchase housing, rent housing, get insurance, all the things we need to do. So I think it's worsening in regards to persons of color and national origin, which is where folks are from. But I also think homeowners associations are becoming more problematic in not accepting and realizing their responsibilities under the non-discrimination laws. Mobile home courts, also the problems there are increasing, particularly in regards to their belief that they don't have to comply with these laws. On the plus side, I think I have just been thrilled these last few months, particularly since March, the contacts we have from realtors, one seeking support and advice potentially or information about certain issues like homeowners associations, whether they can and can't do certain things, but also calling us in for education opportunities to make sure they know what they need to know to comply with the non-discrimination laws.
Yeah.
So that's been really exciting for us.
On the negative side, the examples you brought up, and I don't mean to suggest or imply that we're taking steps backward, but in your position as executive director with Montana Fair Housing, did any of that surprise you, or you looked at national statistics or whatever and says, well, with more growth, there is the potential for more of these problems. But did it kind of surprise you in a state with the makeup like Montana?
It didn't surprise me at all.
Disappointed you, I'm sure. But.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't surprise me because we're used to in Montana being pretty white, pretty set in our ways of how we're going to operate a business and conduct business. And I think many of us did not prepare ourselves by looking at our potential own biases, because we all have biases. Yeah. We're humans. Yeah. But just, how do I deal with that when I have a client who potentially, for example, is a person of color and I don't care to deal with people of color? How do I set that aside and do my job? And I think from that perspective, we weren't prepared. I also believe just nationally, people are more confrontational about events and about their beliefs and their values. Yeah. And that is problematic in that you say things you shouldn't in your work environment, or you believe this free speech. And you do have a right to your opinions, right? And your values, but that needs to be separate from your business practices.
Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate here on News Talk KGVO. My guest, Pam Bean, Executive Director with Montana Fair Housing. Pam, would people, I'll just use Western Montana for now. Missoula is recognized as a pretty liberal community. Would people in Western Montana be surprised by the number of complaints your office receives on a regular basis?
I think it would depend on who you're talking with.
Okay.
I think most people would be surprised at the number of allegations we get. And surprised by often the types of allegations. I think we focus a lot on the hot issue right now is accommodations for persons with disabilities for assistance animals. But it goes well beyond that. We're dealing with an older population. We're aging in Montana, so a lot of folks are acquiring limitations and need modifications like grab bars or ramps. We have a lot of vets in Montana, and it surprises me, and I would hope would surprise many people, the comments that are made to veterans or some of the requests that they've made to be able to live independently as they can with some of their limitations. Gosh. Requests like fencing or something to help for more privacy, and housing providers, homeowners associations denying the right to do some of that. That's surprising.
Gosh. Well, I know I'm certainly interested, and I think a lot of our listeners would be interested as well. What are some of the most or more common forms of discrimination complaints that are called to your attention?
The largest number of allegations we receive are based on disability, and then familial status, which would be denying households with kids or treating them differently, like charging more of a deposit if you have kids and that type of thing. We get still quite a few marital status complaints, and are getting more complaints on LGBTQT,
there's a lot of letters in
LGBTQ
there.
plus
Yeah, there we go.
allegations, and I just find it very disturbing that because of someone's experiences that they're trying to recover from, like domestic violence survivors, vets, people that might have been in bad accidents. They're trying to move on from those experiences. They need stable housing to do so. People with disabilities need stable housing to be able to get the medical care they need, etc. Housing stability is absolutely key for any household, for any person. And without without the stability of housing, you can't secure all the other services you need.
Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate on News Talk KGVO. My guest this week, a return guest, although we haven't seen her in a long time, Pam Bean, Executive Director with Montana Fair Housing. Do you sense, you brought up some examples there, Pam, of most common complaints. A couple of those, frankly, really surprised me, but at the same time, do you sense there is a reluctance on the part of some people, at least, to report suspected violations for whatever reason?
I think that is a growing concern because the market is so tight right now. Whether you're looking to purchase, get a loan, the higher interest rates, or whether you're looking to rent, affordable decent housing is not out there. So if you are living in a place or experience discrimination, trying to see different homes for sale, you're concerned about whether you can stay where you're living, retaliation, or will get kind of blackballed at looking at places because you've reported something.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Is retaliation, and I'm glad you're not going to ask me, what do you mean by retaliation, Denny? Because I think kind of, with a broad brush, we know what we're talking about. But is that a really, that fear of retaliation, is that a significant concern that the Montana Fair Housing Department, encounters?
It's part of almost every conversation we have.
Yeah.
Folks, want to stay where they're living because they couldn't find anything else that they could afford to, but they also are experiencing maybe sexual harassment or denial of requests for modifications or accommodations for folks with disabilities, etc., and are being harassed. There's more and more complaints about harassment from neighbors based on race and national origin. So we're working with them for a much longer period of time before filing complaints, trying to give them some tools, some ideas about what can they do to help stop this or secure the services they need so that they can stay in place without filing a formal complaint and having a housing provider upset by that.
And I'll just kind of drop this in between questions too, just so listeners are aware. Maybe they naturally assume this, but Montana Fair Housing, you do not have legal counsel on on staff. We are not doing. We're not giving legal advice here. But just however we throw that
right.
Disclaimer in there, just so everyone understands. Right?
Yeah, we do not have an attorney on staff.
Right.
So the information we share is what our understanding is of the law or pertinent case law.
Yes.
We can't give legal advice. Thank you for pointing that out.
Certainly. Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate here on News Talk KGVO. My guest, Pam Bean, Executive Director with Montana Fair Housing. And also thank you to a couple of Diane and Becky's marketing partners that also help bring you the program. Miles Link at Opportunity Bank of Montana and Rob Fleming with Man Mortgage. And back to Pam Bean with Montana Fair Housing. What are some of the ways, Pam? I think you've brought up a couple examples, but what are some of the ways you might be made aware of potential discrimination?
Well, we get calls from, housing providers, from consumers. So those things are brought to our attention there. But as an individual, if you're out looking for a place to rent or looking for a place to buy, trying to get an appraisal, if neighbors are mentioning to you that they are paying different amounts or the bank is indicating a different interest rate or closing fee than what you understood was the market right now. If a real estate agent is pushing back on showing you certain homes you want to take a look at, those are all kind of red flags. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean discrimination is occurring. A lot of things can be based because of your qualifications, or if you are a renter, different housing subsidies can make a difference. But they're red flags and they're worth reporting and getting checked out.
Yeah, it's starting to expand in my head, because when we first start talking about this, you think of those kinds of discrimination, you might assume, well, we're only talking about the occasional unscrupulous landlord,
right.
But I'm sure you've already pointed out that it does go much deeper than that in some cases, does it not?
It does, and I think housing providers, by and large, are educated enough about fair housing now and the potential consequences you can have if a case is filed against you.
Yeah.
That they are more, I always say, insidious in their manner of discrimination to hide it. We just rented the unit. Oh, that house has a buy-sell on it. And those things might be true, but they might not be as well. So it takes a lot more on our part to investigate allegations, track down witnesses, look at public records documents, that kind of thing, to identify discrimination these days than it did 30 years ago when I started working for fair housing.
I'm glad you brought that up at this juncture, because what can be the consequences if you are found in violation of fair housing laws? I'm sure it depends on which violation it might be, but running the gamut a little bit, what can happen here, what can happen there, what can happen over there,
Of course, the amount of damages, say, a court would award would depend on the facts and what people experienced, but there's usually, of course, financial compensation. If you had to move or had to buy a house that cost $100,000 more, the differences in what you're paying out. So, and the move itself, then you can also be assessed for emotional damages because some experiences are pretty traumatic. Then there's usually what we call affirmative or public interest relief, where people the housing provider involved, respondent or defendant, is required to attend training, develop a non-discrimination policy, and share that with all applicants. Posting, of course, fair housing information in their offices, on any sites. Civil penalties can be assessed if it's in court, and those start, at the judge can award whatever amount he or she wants to, but for the first offense in and of itself, they can go up to over $20,000. You get into the second and the third offense, and you're up over $100,000. So, can be pretty
Right.
costly.
Right.
And there are cases where we've insisted that the housing provider be out of the business. You know, no longer a real estate agent, no longer a broker. If the behaviors were, one, very egregious, but two, repetitive. They can't manage any of their properties anymore. They have to go to a property manager and pay them, that type of thing. So it can vary some, and again, depends on the facts involved in each particular case.
Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate on News Talk KGVO. And my guest on this week's show, Pam Bean, Executive Director with Montana Fair Housing. Let's move on to this angle, Pam, looking at it this way. If I am a property owner looking to rent or sell, and I want to do the right thing, can you help me make absolutely sure that I'm in compliance? If so, how do we go about that through Montana Fair Housing?
So as I mentioned earlier, we're really pleased with the increased numbers of realtors that have been calling our office and reaching out to us. We can share with them different guidances we're aware of, different cases that have been litigated with similar facts. We can point them through to X portions of the law that may be pertinent, whether it's state or federal law. Our interest is furthering the civil rights of households. It's not, for the consumers or for the housing providers. It's what the law covers and how people can use that to benefit their lives in any capacity. And we actually have had housing providers that were our clients. One right now, actually, in federal court with DOJ. Something happens to them where they experience discrimination either by maybe their broker or an individual owner of a house, something like that.
Got it. Okay.
Maybe face retaliation because they were not going to break the laws, so they lose that sale or something. So they've experienced a loss of income, and they have damages to recover. So,
well, since we we are on a show sponsored by two realtors, Diane Beck and Becky Peterson at Windermere Real Estate here in Missoula, from their perspective, how can realtors help you with suspected violations? I didn't mean to make it sound like you said, well, they rat on each other. But I'm sure that there are plenty of realtors who definitely take this very seriously. It's very important to them, and that's probably where you two might interact.
And they can call our office. They can ask directly for me. They can email me. But we can talk about ways that they might, so they don't face retaliation, might be able to address it without filing complaints. They can also call and say, look, I want nothing to do with this, but I feel like you need to know this is happening at X business or X site or something.
Right.
And then we can, go in and do surveying of all the property owners in an HOA or door to door through there, or, whatever. They can always also help us with doing some joint events. We've done some with the Missoula folks during Pride Month, shared booths. The realtors in Butte have contacted us about doing an event in September. So letting folks know that realtors and housing providers in general aren't the enemy. They can also be very supportive of our work, which I think would be bring them some business if folks know that they support civil rights. Of course, they can also donate money
Okay, sure. Naturally.
You're right,
Yeah,
as a
yeah.
nonprofit. Yep.
So events and workshops and this and that. Montana Fair Housing's involved in that. What about awareness campaigns? And I guess this might be, since we just talked about those kinds of events for realtors and or maybe property owners and things, but other awareness campaigns. What does Montana Fair Housing do to let people know that you're here for them and can be a great resource?
Well, we try to avail ourselves of different venues like radio
Thank you.
and newspapers. We've run several ads around the state throughout the year as issues come up, or if we're getting allegations in a certain area, trying to reach out to other potential victims. Just let people know there are these rights out there. We do a lot of, usually when I'm traveling somewhere, if I drive by a organization, an agency, a business, I'm like, hey, I've never stopped there. I'll pull in and share brochures and introduce,
okay.
A lot of that old school way of doing things.
Makes you kind of a traveling salesman.
Yeah,
that
right.
way.
We have our website, doing a little on social media, and looking actually to hire or get somebody to volunteer to help us more with the social media campaigns, and
Right.
so
All right.
trying to get out there every way we can.
Yes, a lot of different options there. Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate here on News Talk KGVO, and my guest Pam Bean, Executive Director with Montana Fair Housing. Final couple minutes here, I ask all my guests about success stories. I think you've brought up some examples already, Pam, but things that have happened maybe recently that have given you a lot of extra satisfaction being the Executive Director of Montana Fair Housing.
A little bit older of a case, but
Sure.
probably the one that sticks in my head always first, and then I'll share some others. But was a marital status and familial status case we actually did in Missoula. And it ended up in federal court. Our client won. And all that was great. We got the affirmative relief, some financial damages. But about 10 years later, she tracked me down, and I no longer live in Missoula, to let me know that with that money, she had started college, and it helped support her and her daughter through college, got her degree, has a really good job now, and had just bought her first house in Missoula.
Wow.
And that just was awesome to hear
Yeah.
from me, to know that something I did so long ago, somebody made good use of.
That's that is a fantastic example. Hey, in the final few seconds here, we want to make sure everybody knows who we're talking to. That's Pam Bean, Executive Director, Montana Fair Housing, on Missoula Real Estate Today, and I'm sure glad you could come back in. How about the contact information if people would like to get a hold of you or find out more about Montana Fair Housing?
Our phone number is 406-782-2573 or 800-929-2611. We also use the Montana Relay service at 711. My email address is pam@montanafairhousing.org, and then our website, montanafairhousing.org.
Pam Bean, Executive Director with Montana Fair Housing, on this week's Missoula Real Estate Today. Nice to see you again. I'm glad you could come back.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you for listening to Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate. For current listings and services Beck and Beck provide, visit movetomissoula.com. That's Missoula.com. We'll see you next time on Missoula Real Estate Today.